The October rain drummed against the windows of St. Mary's Cathedral in downtown Portland as mourners filled the oak pews for Grandmother Rose's funeral. Elena Martinez clutched a tissue in her trembling hands, her dark eyes fixed on the mahogany casket adorned with white lilies. At 28, she had never imagined losing the woman who raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. "She looks so peaceful," whispered Elena's best friend Sarah, squeezing her shoulder gently. The two had driven up from San Francisco the night before, barely making it through the winding mountain roads in the storm. Elena nodded, unable to speak. Rose Martinez had been more than a grandmother. She was Elena's anchor, her confidant, and the keeper of countless family stories that stretched back generations. The old Victorian house on Maple Street where they'd lived together felt impossibly empty now. Father Morrison's voice echoed through the cathedral as he spoke about Rose's 92 years of life, her work as a seamstress, and her devotion to family. Elena's mind drifted to Sunday afternoons spent in Rose's sewing room, watching weathered hands create magic with needle and thread, while stories of the old country spilled forth in accented English. "Your great-grandmother brought this from Mexico," Rose would say, holding up a delicate silver bracelet. "And this ring belonged to my mother. Someday, mija, these will be yours." The jewelry box had fascinated Elena since childhood, a small, wooden treasure chest lined with faded burgundy velvet, filled with pieces that caught the light like captured stars. Rose would let her try on the vintage brooches and necklaces during special occasions, always promising that the collection would pass to Elena when the time came. As the service concluded, Elena felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see her cousin Marcus, his face solemn beneath prematurely gray hair. Behind him stood his sister Victoria, elegant in a black designer dress that probably cost more than Elena made in a month as a graphic designer. "Elena, we're so sorry for your loss," Marcus said, his voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who worked in corporate PR. Grandmother Rose meant everything to all of us. Elena hadn't seen her cousins in over 3 years, not since the awkward Christmas dinner where Victoria had made snide comments about Elena's simple lifestyle, and Marcus had spent the entire evening on business calls. They were Rose's brother's grandchildren, successful professionals who lived in Seattle and rarely visited despite Rose's age and declining health. "Thank you for coming," Elena managed, surprised they had made the trip. Victoria stepped forward, her perfectly manicured nails catching the cathedral's dim lighting. "We'll need to discuss grandmother's things, you know. The house, her belongings. Marcus and I have some time before we need to get back to Seattle." Something cold settled in Elena's stomach. "Of course. We can talk after the burial." The rain had intensified by the time they reached Riverside Cemetery, turning the autumn leaves into a slippery carpet beneath their feet. Elena watched as Rose's casket was lowered into the ground beside her grandfather's grave, the finality of it hitting her like a physical blow. The woman who had bandaged her scraped knees, taught her to cook tamales, and listened to every teenage heartbreak was truly gone. Back at the Victorian house on Maple Street, neighbors and friends gathered for the reception Elena had hastily organized. The living room buzzed with quiet conversation as people shared memories of Rose over plates of her famous enchiladas, prepared by ladies from the church. Elena moved through the rooms like a ghost, accepting condolences and trying to process the strange sensation of hosting a gathering in a house that no longer felt like home. Mrs. Chen from next door approached with a warm hug. "Your grandmother was so proud of you, dear. She showed me your design work every time you sent something new. My Elena is so talented," she would say. Elena's throat tightened. Rose had been her biggest cheerleader, the one person who never doubted her decision to pursue art over a more traditional career path. As the afternoon wore on, guests began to leave, offering final hugs and promising to stay in touch. Elena found herself in the kitchen, mechanically washing dishes while Sarah dried them in comfortable silence. Through the window, she could see Marcus and Victoria standing in the backyard, deep in conversation by Rose's prized rose garden. "You okay?" Sarah asked softly. I don't know, Elena admitted. This house holds so many memories. I can't imagine selling it, but I can't afford to keep it either. My freelance work barely covers my San Francisco rent as it is. The back door opened, and her cousins stepped inside, shaking rain from their expensive coats. Victoria's smile seemed forced as she approached. Elena, we need to talk about grandmother's estate, she said without preamble. Marcus and I have been discussing things, and we think it's important to handle everything fairly. Marcus nodded, pulling out his phone. I've already been in touch with a real estate agent. The house should sell quickly. Victorian homes in this neighborhood are in high demand. We can split the proceeds 3 ways. Elena blinked, caught off guard by their efficiency. I haven't even had time to think about any of this yet. She was just buried a few hours ago. I understand this is emotional, Victoria said, her tone suggesting she understood no such thing. But practical matters need to be addressed. We all have busy lives to get back to. What about her personal belongings? Elena asked. Her clothes? Furniture? The family photos? We can donate most of it, Marcus said dismissively, scrolling through his phone as he spoke. Though there might be a few valuable pieces worth appraising. I noticed some nice jewelry in her bedroom. Elena's heart skipped. The jewelry box? Victoria's eyes sharpened with interest. Yes, that wooden box on her dresser. Some of those pieces look quite old, possibly valuable. We should have them, evaluated by a professional. Those pieces were promised to me, Elena said quietly, her voice barely audible over the sound of rain against the windows. Both cousins turned to stare at her. Marcus lowered his phone, his expression skeptical. Promised. To you? Victoria laughed, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. Elena, grandmother never mentioned anything like that to us. Those are family heirlooms. They belong to the whole family. Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks. She told me countless times that they would be mine someday. Some of those pieces have been in our family for generations. Stories and promises are one thing, Marcus said, his PR training evident in his measured tone. But without documentation, we need to handle this equitably. The jewelry should be appraised and divided fairly among the 3 of us. Or sold. And the proceeds split, Victoria added. I'm sure they'd fetch a good price at auction. The casual way she suggested selling Rose's treasured collection made Elena's stomach turn. These weren't just valuable objects to be liquidated. They were tangible connections to family history, to the great-grandmother Elena had never met, to traditions and stories that would die with their sale. You can't be serious, Elena said, her voice growing stronger. Those pieces meant everything to her. She wore them to special occasions, told me stories about each one. They're not just jewelry, they're family history. Victoria's expression hardened. Sentiment doesn't trump fairness, Elena. Just because you lived with her doesn't mean you're entitled to everything valuable she owned. The implication stung. Elena had lived with Rose not by choice initially, but because she'd been orphaned and had nowhere else to go. Over the years, it had become a blessing rather than a burden. The 2 women had formed a bond deeper than many mothers and daughters, shared. I didn't live with her for her money or belongings, Elena said, her voice tight with anger. I lived with her because she was my family. I took care of her when she got sick, drove her to doctor's appointments, made sure she took her medications. Where were you 2 when she fell last winter and broke her hip? We have careers, Elena, Marcus said defensively. We couldn't just drop everything to play caregiver. Play caregiver? Elena's voice rose. She wasn't a burden. She was our grandmother. Sarah stepped closer, a silent show of support. The kitchen had grown tense, the earlier warmth of shared. Grief replaced by something uglier. Victoria crossed her arms. Look, we're not trying to be unfair. But you can't expect us to just hand over valuable family heirlooms because of some vague promises. If grandmother really intended for you to have specific items, she would have put it in writing. Elena's mind raced. Rose had always been organized about important matters. She'd shown Elena where she kept important documents, had updated her will just 2 years ago with the help of Mr. Patterson, the family lawyer. But they'd never formally discussed the jewelry beyond Rose's repeated assurances that it would someday be Elena's. "The will," Elena began, "doesn't mention specific personal items," Marcus interrupted. "Mr. Patterson called me this morning. Grandmother left the house and remaining assets to be divided equally among the 3 of us. Personal belongings aren't specifically addressed, which means they fall under general assets." Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She'd been so focused on grieving, on getting through the funeral, that she hadn't considered the legal implications of Rose's death. Her cousins, meanwhile, had already consulted with lawyers and real estate agents. "So what are you proposing?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We inventory everything valuable," Victoria said. "Jewelry, antiques, anything worth appraising. Then we either divide the items equally or sell them and split the proceeds. The jewelry stays together or gets sold," Marcus added. "Those are the fair options." Elena looked around the kitchen where she'd learned to cook, where she'd done homework at the scarred wooden table, where Rose had bandaged her broken heart after her first serious breakup. Everything familiar was about to be catalogued, appraised, and divided like inventory in a store. "I need time to think," she said finally. Victoria checked her expensive watch. "We're staying at the Hilton downtown tonight, flying back to Seattle tomorrow evening. We need to settle this before we leave." The ultimatum hung in the air like a threat. Elena felt trapped between grief and practicality, between sentiment and what her cousins called fairness. After they left, she sat at Rose's kitchen table while Sarah made tea, the silence heavy with unspoken thoughts. "They can't just take everything," Sarah said finally. "Maybe they're right," Elena whispered. "Maybe I am being selfish. Maybe wanting to keep the jewelry is just sentiment." "Bullshit," Sarah said firmly. "Those pieces were promised to you. Rose talked about them constantly. I heard her myself. Remember her birthday last year when she showed us that pearl necklace? She literally said, 'This will look beautiful on Elena at her wedding someday.'" Elena remembered, but memories weren't legal documents. As rain continued to fall outside, she felt utterly alone despite Sarah's presence. The woman who had been her anchor was gone, and now even the physical reminders of her love were being questioned and claimed by relatives who had barely made an effort to know Rose in her final years. She walked upstairs to Rose's bedroom, her footsteps echoing in the quiet house. The room still smelled like Rose's lavender lotion and the faint scent of the roses she brought in from the garden each summer. On the dresser sat the wooden jewelry box, its brass hinges tarnished with age. Elena opened it carefully, her fingers tracing familiar pieces. The silver bracelet with tiny bells that Rose said had belonged to her own grandmother. The pearl necklace Marcus and Victoria had dismissed as possibly valuable. The delicate gold locket with Rose's parents' photos. Inside, each piece held stories, connections to family members Elena would never meet, but whose legacy lived on in these tangible treasures. At the bottom of the box, beneath the burgundy velvet lining, Elena noticed something she'd never seen before. A slight bulge, as if something had been tucked underneath. Her heart raced as she carefully lifted the corner of the fabric. There, pressed against the wood bottom of the box, was an old envelope, yellowed with age and slightly bent from years of hiding. Elena's hands trembled as she pulled it free, noticing her own name written on the front in Rose's careful handwriting. Inside were several pieces of paper, receipts, business cards, and what looked like a handwritten letter. Elena's breath caught as she unfolded the first receipt, dated 15 years ago from Hartwell's fine jewelry on Oak Street. The description read, "Vintage jewelry collection, various pieces circa 1920-1950s, purchased for Elena Martinez, future inheritance gift." Her heart pounded as she read Rose's signature at the bottom, along with a handwritten note. "For my beloved granddaughter Elena, these pieces are yours by right and by love. May they bring you joy as they have brought me. Abuela Rose, Elena. Sank onto the bed, the papers scattered around her. Rose had documented everything. Not only had she purchased additional pieces specifically for Elena over the years, but she'd kept receipts and written proof of her intentions. This wasn't just sentiment or memory. This was legal documentation of Rose's wishes. But as Elena's initial joy faded, a more complex emotion took its place. Tomorrow, she would have to face her cousins with this evidence. She would have to prove her right to something that should never have been questioned in the first place. The woman who had loved her unconditionally was gone, and her final gift was having to fight for what should have been freely given. Outside, the rain continued to fall on the empty streets of Portland, washing away the last remnants of a day that had changed everything. In Rose's bedroom, surrounded by memories and armed with proof of love that transcended death, Elena prepared for a battle she'd never wanted to fight. Elena barely slept that night, tossing restlessly in her childhood bed while rain pelted the windows. Every creak of the old Victorian house seemed amplified in the darkness, reminders of a presence that was no longer there. She'd spread the contents of Rose's hidden envelope across the quilted bedspread, studying each piece by lamplight until her eyes burned. The documentation was thorough and heartbreaking. Rose had been collecting pieces for Elena since she was 13 years old, just a year after coming to live with her grandmother. Receipt after receipt from Hartwell's fine jewelry, Morrison's antiques, and even a few pieces purchased at Haumansito estate sales, all carefully annotated with Elena's name and marked as inheritance items. There was more than just receipts. Rose had kept a small journal documenting the history of each piece, which had belonged to Elena's great-grandmother Maria, which ones Rose had purchased to add to the collection, even notes about which occasions Elena might wear them. The pearl earrings for her graduation, read one entry. The silver bracelet for her wedding day. May she be as happy as I was wearing my mother's jewelry. But the most devastating discovery was a letter dated just 3 months ago, written in Rose's increasingly shaky handwriting, as arthritis made writing difficult. My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I pray you have found these papers before anyone else could claim what is rightfully yours. I have watched you grow from a frightened girl into a beautiful, compassionate woman, and nothing has brought me more joy than knowing these family treasures will live on with someone who understands their true value. I know Marcus and Victoria are good people in their hearts, but they see dollar signs where we see memories. They have built successful lives without needing these pieces, while you have built a life rich in love and creativity. These jewels were meant to be worn, to be cherished, to connect you to the generations of strong women who came before. Do not let anyone make you feel guilty for keeping what I have given you freely and with intention. You earned these not through blood alone, but through the years you spent as my companion, my helper, and my joy. Stand firm, mija. The truth is in your hands. Con todo mi amor. Abuela Rose Elena had cried reading it, imagining Rose in her final months, worried enough about potential family conflict to hide legal documentation and write what amounted to a final defense of her granddaughter's inheritance. The fact that Rose had anticipated this exact scenario made Elena's heart ache with both love and fury. Morning brought gray skies and the lingering smell of rain-soaked earth. Elena dressed carefully in a navy blue dress, professional but not confrontational. Sarah helped her organize the papers into a folder, both women working with the focused energy of soldiers preparing for battle. You don't have to face them alone, Sarah offered for the third time as they waited in Rose's living room. Yes, I do, Elena replied, clutching the folder. This is family business, and honestly, having you there might make them more defensive. They already think I'm being manipulative. At precisely 10 o'clock, a silver BMW pulled into Rose's driveway. Elena watched through the lace curtains as Marcus and Victoria emerged, both dressed in expensive business attire that seemed designed to intimidate. They'd brought briefcases, she noticed, coming armed with their own documentation and agenda. Elena opened the front door before they could knock, determined to maintain some control over the encounter. "Good morning," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Elena." Victoria nodded briskly, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. "We appreciate you meeting with us early. Marcus has a conference call at noon, so we'll need to handle this efficiently." They settled in Rose's living room, the cousins sitting together on the floral sofa while Elena took the wingback chair that had been Rose's favorite. The morning light filtering through the windows caught dust motes dancing in the air, and Elena couldn't help thinking how Rose would have hated having dusty furniture when guests were over. Marcus opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency. "We've spoken with Mr. Patterson again, and he's confirmed that the will doesn't specify individual items. We've also contacted a jewelry appraiser who can meet us here this afternoon to evaluate the collection." "That won't be necessary," Elena said quietly. Victoria's eyebrows rose. "Elena, we discussed this yesterday. We need professional appraisals to ensure fair division." "There won't be any division," Elena continued, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The jewelry collection is mine. Grandmother left documentation proving her intentions." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus slowly closed his briefcase, his expression shifting from businesslike efficiency to suspicion. "What kind of documentation?" he asked carefully. Elena opened her folder, her hand surprisingly steady. Receipts, purchase records, and a letter from grandmother explaining her wishes. She's been collecting pieces specifically for me for 15 years, and she kept detailed records of everything. She handed over copies of the receipts first, watching as both cousins scanned the papers with growing disbelief. Victoria's face flushed red as she read Rose's handwritten notes. "This is impossible," Victoria said flatly. "Grandmother never mentioned buying jewelry specifically for you. These could be forged." "Look at the dates," Elena said calmly. "Look at the signatures. Those are grandmother's handwriting, her signature that Mr. Patterson has on file. And here's the letter she wrote 3 months ago." Marcus read the letter twice, his jaw tightening with each word. When he finished, he set it down on the coffee table, as if it had burned him. "This changes nothing," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Even if grandmother purchased some items with you in mind, the jewelry collection as a whole represents family heritage. She may have had intentions, but legal ownership is different from intentions." Elena felt a flash of anger so pure it surprised her. "Legal ownership?" "Marcus, she bought these pieces with her own money and documented her intention to give them to me. How is that not legal ownership? Because they were never formally transferred to you," Victoria interjected, her professional composure cracking. "Until someone dies, their possessions belong to their estate, regardless of what they said they planned to do." "So grandmother's written wishes mean nothing to you?" Elena asked, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "Of course they mean something," Marcus said defensively. "But we have to think practically. Those pieces could be worth tens of thousands of dollars. It's not fair to exclude us from family heirlooms just because grandmother got sentimental in her old age." Elena stared at him, shocked by the callousness of his words. Sentimental in her old age? She was documenting her wishes to prevent exactly this kind of family conflict. She knew you two would try to claim pieces that were never meant for you. Victoria's mask of professionalism finally slipped completely. "Never meant for us?" "Elena, just because you lived here playing caretaker doesn't make you more entitled to family property than blood relatives." "Playing caretaker?" Elena's voice was deadly quiet. "I spent the last 16 years of my life loving that woman. I held her hand through cancer treatments, helped her when she couldn't manage stairs anymore, celebrated every holiday and birthday with her. Where were you when she needed family?" "We visited," Marcus said weakly. "You visited twice a year for major holidays, stayed for exactly 2 hours each time, and spent most of those hours on your phones," Elena shot back. "Don't you dare lecture me about family obligations." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of Rose's grandfather clock. Elena could see her cousins processing the documentation, their earlier confidence wavering as they realized the strength of her legal position. But she could also see something else in their eyes: resentment, calculation, and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Victoria was the first to regroup. Fine. Assuming these documents are legitimate, they still don't account for the entire collection. Some of those pieces were in grandmother's possession long before she started buying things for Elena. The original family heirlooms should still be divided equally. Elena felt her heart sink. Victoria wasn't wrong. Some pieces had been in the family for generations, passed down through Rose's line long before Elena was even born. The silver bracelet from her great-grandmother, the wedding ring Rose's mother had worn, the antique brooches that predated Rose's marriage. The receipts show which pieces grandmother purchased, Marcus said, scanning the papers again. But the original family jewelry, the pieces that were already in her possession when Elena came to live with her, those aren't covered by these purchase records. Elena's mind raced. Rose's letter had been general, expressing love and intention, but not specifically inventorying every single piece in the collection. The receipts covered many items, but not all of them. Her cousins had found their angle of attack. "So what are you proposing?" Elena asked, though she dreaded the answer. "We divide the original family pieces 3 ways, Victoria said, her confidence returning. You keep the items grandmother specifically purchased for you according to these receipts. The historical pieces, the ones that truly represent family heritage, get distributed fairly among all family members." Elena thought of the silver bracelet that had belonged to her great-grandmother, the one Rose had told her countless stories about. She thought of the gold locket with the faded photographs of ancestors she'd never meet. These weren't just valuable objects. They were the physical connections to her family history, the tangible links to generations of women who had shaped her identity. "Those pieces were promised to me too," she said desperately. "Grandmother always said the entire collection would be mine someday." "Promises aren't legal documents," Marcus replied, falling back into his professional persona. "And frankly, Elena, you're being greedy. These receipts show grandmother spent thousands of dollars buying jewelry specifically for you. Isn't that enough?" The accusation of greed stung because Elena could see how it might look from the outside. She was fighting for jewelry while her cousins seemed willing to compromise, but they didn't understand that splitting the collection would destroy its meaning, would scatter pieces of family history to relatives who saw them as assets rather than heritage. "What if I bought your shares?" Elena asked suddenly. "What if I paid you for your portions of the original pieces?" Victoria and Marcus exchanged glances. Elena could practically see them calculating values, considering the proposal from a purely financial perspective. "At fair market value," Victoria said slowly. "We'd need professional appraisals to determine worth." Elena's heart sank. On her freelance graphic designer income, she could barely afford her San Francisco rent. Professional appraisals would likely value the antique pieces at thousands of dollars, money she simply didn't have. "I'd need time to arrange financing," she said weakly. "How much time?" Marcus asked. "We can't leave this unresolved indefinitely." Elena felt trapped between impossible choices. Accept the division of Rose's collection, destroying its integrity and meaning, or somehow find money she didn't have to buy back pieces that should have been hers by right. As she struggled with the decision, her phone buzzed with a text message. Sarah, who had been quietly waiting upstairs, had sent a simple message. Check the envelope again. Rose was thorough about everything. Elena excused herself and hurried upstairs, leaving her cousins to discuss appraisal logistics in Rose's living room. In the bedroom, she emptied the envelope completely, looking for anything she might have missed in her emotional state the night before. There, stuck to the back of Rose's letter, was a small piece of paper she had overlooked. An inventory, list in Rose's handwriting. detailing every single piece in the jewelry collection. Next to each item, Rose had noted its origin. Great-grandmother's bracelet, for Elena. Mother's wedding ring, for Elena. Pearl necklace purchased 1987, for Elena. Every single piece, whether purchased or inherited, was marked for Elena. Rose had been more thorough than anyone realized, documenting not just her purchases, but her specific intentions for every item in the collection. Elena's hands shook as she read the comprehensive list. Rose had anticipated this exact conflict and had prepared accordingly. The woman who had raised her had known her family well enough to predict their behavior and had taken steps to protect Elena's inheritance from exactly this kind of challenge. Armed with complete documentation, Elena returned downstairs to find her cousins hunched over Marcus's laptop, researching jewelry appraisers and auction houses. They looked up as she entered, their expressions shifting as they noticed the paper in her hands. "There's more," Elena said simply, and handed over Rose's inventory list. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more final. Victoria read the list twice, her face growing paler with each item. Marcus stared at his laptop screen as if it might provide some escape from the reality of Rose's thorough documentation. "She really planned all this," Victoria said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena nodded. She knew exactly what would happen after she died. She knew you'd challenge my inheritance, and she prepared for it. Marcus closed his laptop with a sharp snap. "This is unbelievable. She cut us out completely." "She didn't cut you out," Elena said firmly. "She left you the house, her savings, her furniture, everything else. She just wanted to make sure the jewelry went to someone who would value it for the right reasons." Victoria stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. "The right reasons? Elena, we're her family too, just because we built successful careers and didn't spend our adult lives playing house with an elderly woman doesn't make us less deserving of family heirlooms." The venom in her voice shocked Elena. All pretense of grief or family solidarity had evaporated, replaced by pure resentment and entitlement. "You're right," Elena said quietly. "You are family too. But when did you last visit her? When did you last call just to talk? When did you last show interest in the stories behind these pieces?" "We had lives to build," Marcus said defensively. "Careers, responsibilities. We couldn't spend our 20s and 30s catering to an old woman's need." For company, Elena felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. "That old woman raised me when my parents died. She loved all of us unconditionally, even when we didn't deserve it. And now, hours after her funeral, you're standing in her living room, calling her needy and dismissing her final wishes because they don't benefit you financially." The truth hung in the air between them, ugly and undeniable. Elena could see her cousins recognizing themselves in her words, could see the shame they were trying to suppress beneath their anger and disappointment. Victoria gathered her purse and coat with sharp, angry movements. "Fine, keep your precious jewelry, Elena, but don't expect us to pretend this was fair or that grandmother was thinking clearly when she made these decisions." "She was thinking clearly enough to document everything legally," Elena replied. "She was thinking clearly enough to anticipate this exact conversation and prepare for it." Marcus stood, his expression a mixture of defeat and lingering resentment. "We'll be in touch about selling the house and settling the rest of the estate. I assume you won't contest a quick sale since you can't afford to buy us out." The implication was clear. They might have lost the battle over the jewelry, but they still held power over the house Elena loved. It was a small, petty victory, but they were claiming it nonetheless. After they left, Elena sat alone in Rose's living room, surrounded by the documentation that had saved her inheritance. She should have felt victorious, but instead she felt hollow and sad. The family bonds that had already been strained were now completely severed. Rose's funeral had been the last time she would likely see Marcus and Victoria for years, if ever. Sarah found her there an hour later, still holding Rose's inventory list. You won, Sarah said gently. Did I? Elena asked. I kept the jewelry, but I lost what was left of my family. Rose would be heartbroken knowing her death caused this kind of conflict. Rose prepared for this because she knew it was inevitable, Sarah pointed out. She chose to protect what mattered most to her, making sure her treasures went to someone who would cherish them properly. Elena nodded, understanding the truth of it, even as she mourned the cost. Rose had known her family's character better than anyone, had seen the writing on the wall, and had acted accordingly. The jewelry was safe, the stories and memories preserved. But the price had been any remaining connection to her extended family. That evening, as rain began to fall again outside Rose's windows, Elena opened the jewelry box and touched each piece, gently. Tomorrow, she would have to start the process of packing up a lifetime, of saying goodbye to the house that had been her sanctuary. But tonight, she would honor Rose's memory by appreciating the gifts she had fought so hard to preserve, not just the jewelry, but the love and foresight that had made their preservation possible. The battle was won, but the war over Rose's legacy was just beginning. 3 weeks after the funeral, Elena found herself standing in Rose's empty bedroom at 6 a.m., surrounded by boxes and the ghosts of 16 years of shared memories. The jewelry box sat open on the dresser, its contents carefully cataloged and photographed for insurance purposes. Each piece now had documentation that would follow it forever. Rose's meticulous records ensuring that future generations would know the love and intention behind every gift. Sarah had returned to San Francisco after a week, leaving Elena to manage the overwhelming task of sorting through Rose's possessions alone. The cousins had wasted no time listing the house with their realtor friend, and potential buyers were scheduled to start viewing it the following Monday. Elena had exactly 5 days to pack up a lifetime and decide what could be saved, donated, or discarded. The silver lining, if it could be called that, was the jewelry's increasing significance as Elena researched each piece. What her cousins had seen as mere valuable objects were revealing themselves to be extraordinary artifacts of family history. The pearl necklace Rose had worn to Elena's high school graduation wasn't just beautiful. It was made from genuine, Mikimoto pearls, likely worth several $1,000s. The antique brooches weren't costume jewelry, but authentic Art Deco pieces that collectors would covet. But more important than monetary value were the stories Elena was discovering. Hidden in Rose's bedroom closet, she'd found photo albums and journals that provided context for nearly every piece in the collection. The silver bracelet with tiny bells had been a wedding gift to Elena's great-grandmother from her husband in 1923. The gold locket contained not just photographs, but tiny locks of hair from children who had died in infancy. Elena's great-aunts she'd never known existed. Each discovery made Elena more grateful for Rose's foresight and more appalled by her cousin's mercenary approach to family heritage. These weren't just accessories to be appraised and divided. They were tangible connections to generations of women who had loved, suffered, celebrated, and endured. Elena's phone rang as she was carefully wrapping the pearl necklace in tissue. Paper. The caller ID showed Marcus's number, the first time either cousin had contacted her since their confrontational meeting. Elena. Marcus's voice was carefully neutral, his PR training evident even in a family call. How are you managing with the house? I'm getting through it, she replied cautiously, wondering what had prompted the unexpected contact. Victoria, and I have been thinking about our conversation. We may have been hasty in some of our reactions. Elena paused in her wrapping, suspicious of this sudden change in tone. What do you mean? Well, we were all emotional after grandmother's funeral. Grief makes people say things they don't necessarily mean. We're wondering if there might be room for compromise after all. Elena's stomach tightened. What kind of compromise? You keep the jewelry grandmother specifically purchased for you, the pieces with receipts. But perhaps we could work out something regarding the original family heirlooms. Not necessarily a 3-way split, but maybe a partnership of sorts. Marcus, we've been through this. Grandmother's inventory list was clear about her intentions for every piece. Inventory lists can be interpreted different ways, Marcus said smoothly. And Elena, we've done some research on those pieces. Some of them are quite valuable, more valuable than any of us realized. It seems unfair for you to benefit from grandmother's lack of knowledge about current market values. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of research? We had photos from grandmother's house appraised by a jewelry expert in Seattle. That pearl necklace alone is worth nearly $8,000. The Art Deco brooches are worth thousands each. We're talking about a collection valued at potentially $50,000 or more. The number hit Elena like a physical blow. She'd known the pieces were valuable, but $50,000 represented more money than she'd ever possessed at one time. More importantly, it explained her cousin's renewed interest in compromise. Those are just estimates, Elena said, weakly. Professional estimates based on authenticated photographs, Marcus corrected. Elena, we're not trying to be unreasonable here, but you have to understand our position. We're talking about enough money to significantly impact all our lives. Elena sank onto Rose's bed, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. $50,000 would change everything for her. It could pay off her student loans, provide a down payment on a small apartment, give her the financial stability to pursue her art full-time. But that same value was exactly why her cousins were circling back, their earlier defeat transformed into renewed determination. The documentation is clear, Marcus. Grandmother wanted me to have these pieces. Documentation from 15 years ago, when the market values were different, he replied. Elena, be realistic. Do you think grandmother would have been so generous if she'd known she was giving away $50,000? That's more than she had in her savings account. The implication was devastating, that Rose's love and generosity had limits, that she wouldn't have been so giving if she'd understood the true cost. Elena felt sick thinking about it, knowing it wasn't true but unable to completely dismiss the seed of doubt Marcus was planting. Victoria and I have a proposal, Marcus continued. You keep half the collection, your choice of pieces. We'll split the other half fairly. Everyone benefits. Everyone gets a meaningful inheritance, and we don't have to involve lawyers or probate court complications. Probate court? Elena's voice cracked. You're threatening legal action? Not threatening, Marcus said smoothly. But Elena, when estates involve this kind of value, sometimes formal legal processes become necessary, especially when there are questions about the deceased's mental capacity when making important decisions. Elena's blood turned to ice. Grandmother's mental capacity was perfect. She was sharp until the day she died. She was 92 years old, Elena. She'd been on pain medications for her arthritis, had that fall last winter that affected her mobility. It's not unreasonable to question whether she fully understood the financial implications of her decisions. The threat was clear now, wrapped in reasonable language but unmistakably menacing. Elena could picture the legal battle. Expensive lawyers, court proceedings, Rose's memory dissected and questioned by strangers. Even if Elena ultimately won, the process would destroy what little remained of Rose's legacy and Elena's financial stability. Think about our offer, Marcus concluded. We'll give you until Monday to decide. After that, we'll need to pursue other options. After he hung up, Elena sat in Rose's bedroom, shaking with anger and fear. The jewelry box seemed to mock her from the dresser. These beautiful pieces that Rose had lovingly collected were becoming the source of ugly family destruction. Maybe Marcus and Victoria were right. Maybe she was being greedy, selfish, unrealistic, about what one person deserved to inherit. But as she looked around Rose's bedroom, Elena remembered countless conversations about family, legacy, and what really mattered in life. Rose had been adamant that possessions should serve love, not the other way around. She'd told Elena repeatedly that the jewelry's value lay not in its price, but in its connections. to family, to history, to the women who had worn these pieces during their most important moments. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How's the packing going? Need moral support?" Instead of texting back, Elena called her friend directly, needing to hear a sympathetic voice. "They want half the collection," Elena said without preamble, then explained Marcus's call and veiled threats. "Those absolute bastards," Sarah said when Elena finished. "They lost fair and square, so now they're trying intimidation tactics." "Maybe they have a point, though," Elena said miserably. $50,000 is a lot of money. Maybe Rose didn't realize— "Stop right there," Sarah interrupted firmly. "Rose was a smart woman who lived through the Depression, World War II, and 92 years of life. She knew the value of things, both monetary and sentimental. She chose you because she trusted you to understand the difference." Elena walked to Rose's vanity, where a framed photograph showed the two of them at Elena's college graduation. Rose wore the pearl necklace and a broad smile, her arm around Elena's shoulders. The love in both their faces was unmistakable. "What if they really— take me to court?" Elena asked. "I can't afford legal fees and they can." "Then we figure it out," Sarah said. "But Elena, you can't let them bully you into giving up what Rose specifically wanted you to have. That woman documented everything precisely because she knew this would happen." After ending the call, Elena spent the rest of the day photographing every page of Rose's journals, every receipt, every piece of documentation. If her cousins wanted a legal battle, she would be prepared with evidence of Rose's clear mental state and consistent intentions over 15 years. But as evening fell, Elena found herself considering Marcus's offer more seriously. Half the collection would still be substantial. She could choose the pieces with the most sentimental value and let her cousins fight over the purely valuable ones. It would mean peace, family reconciliation, and avoiding a devastating court battle. She was still wrestling with the decision when her doorbell rang at 8 p.m. Through Rose's front window, she could see an unfamiliar car in the driveway, a modest sedan that didn't match her cousin's expensive tastes. Elena opened the door to find an elderly man in a worn suit, his gray hair neatly combed and his expression kindly but serious. "Miss Martinez? I'm Harold Hartwell. I believe you have some of my family's old business records." Elena stared at him, blankly until recognition clicked. "Hartwell's fine jewelry? From the receipts?" "My grandfather's store, then my father's, and briefly mine before I retired 5 years ago," he confirmed. "I heard about Mrs. Martinez's passing. She was a valued customer for many years. I also heard there might be some questions about the jewelry she purchased." Elena invited him in, curious and cautious. Harold Hartwell settled into Rose's armchair with the careful movements of someone well into his 70s. "Mrs. Martinez called me about 6 months ago," he said without preamble. She was concerned about potential family conflicts after her death and wanted to make sure all her documentation was in order. I helped her organize the receipts and provided additional authentication for the pieces she'd purchased over the years. Elena's heart raced. Additional authentication? Harold reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. Photographs, detailed descriptions, and my professional assessment of each piece's condition and value. "Your grandmother was very thorough. She wanted no room for doubt about her intentions or the legitimacy of her purchases." Elena opened the folder to find professional photographs of every piece in Rose's collection, along with detailed documentation that made her earlier receipts look casual by comparison. Each item had been cataloged with its purchase date, condition, estimated current value, and Harold's signature as a certified appraiser. "She paid me to do a complete assessment 6 months ago," Harold continued. "Mrs. Martinez told me she was worried about relatives who might question her granddaughter's inheritance. She wanted professional documentation that would stand up in any legal proceeding." Elena felt tears threatening as she read through Harold's meticulous records. Even facing her own mortality, Rose had been thinking ahead, protecting Elena from exactly the situation she now faced. There's something else, Harold said gently. Mrs. Martinez told me stories about each piece, their family history, their sentimental significance to her and to you. I've been in the jewelry business for 40 years, and I've never seen anyone care more about the stories behind their pieces than their monetary value. She made it very clear that she was preserving family heritage, not just valuable objects. My cousins are saying she didn't understand how valuable the collection was, Elena said quietly. They think she would have made different choices if she'd known the current market values. Harold's expression hardened. Miss Martinez, your grandmother had me provide current market assessments for every single piece. She knew exactly what she was giving you, down to the penny. She told me, and I quote, "My Elena understands that some treasures can't be measured in dollars." Elena's hands shook as she processed this information. Rose hadn't just documented her intentions. She'd anticipated every possible challenge. Her cousins might raise and had prepared accordingly. The woman who had raised her had known her family's character with devastating accuracy. "Why are you telling me this?" Elena asked. "Because Mrs. Martinez asked me to," Harold replied simply. "She said if there were ever questions about her mental state or her understanding of what she was doing, I should come forward with the truth. She was as sharp as anyone I've ever met, right up until the end." Harold left copies of all his documentation with Elena, along with his business card and an offer to testify in court if necessary. After he left, Elena sat surrounded by an overwhelming amount of evidence proving Rose's clear intentions, thorough planning, and complete mental competency. Her phone rang again, Victoria this time, her voice tighter and more aggressive than Marcus's had been. "Elena, we've been thinking more about the situation. $50,000 in jewelry is a significant inheritance that affects the overall value of grandmother's estate. We think the fair thing would be to have the collection appraised as part of the general estate and included in the three-way division." "Victoria, we've already been through this. We've also spoken to a lawyer about grandmother's mental capacity in her final months," Victoria interrupted. "Elderly people often make impulsive decisions about valuable items, especially when they're isolated and dependent on one caregiver. It's not uncommon for undue influence to affect inheritance decisions." Elena felt rage building in her chest. "Undue influence? You're accusing me of manipulating her?" "We're saying the situation may not have been as clear-cut as you believe," Victoria replied coolly. "When someone's entire social world revolves around one person, it can create unhealthy dependencies and skewed decision-making." The accusation was so vile that Elena momentarily couldn't speak. They were suggesting she had isolated Rose, manipulated her, taken advantage of an elderly woman's loneliness and confusion. It was the exact opposite of their relationship. Rose had been Elena's anchor, her source of wisdom and unconditional love. "You have until Monday morning to accept our compromise offer," Victoria continued. "After that, we'll be filing a formal challenge to the jewelry distribution with the probate court. We'll let a judge decide whether grandmother was competent to make such significant financial decisions without family consultation." After Victoria hung up, Elena sat in Rose's kitchen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was facing. Her cousins weren't just challenging her inheritance. They were attacking Rose's memory, suggesting the woman who had raised her was confused, manipulated, or incompetent in her final years. But Elena wasn't defenseless anymore. Harold Hartwell's documentation proved Rose's mental clarity and thorough planning. The journals and photographs showed a woman who was organized, thoughtful, and completely aware of her decisions. Most importantly, the timeline of Rose's actions, spread over 15 years and culminating in recent professional appraisals, demonstrated consistent intentions that had nothing to do with old age or undue influence. Elena spent the weekend organizing her evidence into a comprehensive file that told the complete story of Rose's gift to her granddaughter. By Monday morning, she had a decision to make: accept her cousin's ultimatum or fight for what Rose had intended her to have. As she sat in Rose's bedroom one last time before the house showing, Elena touched each piece of jewelry gently, remembering the stories, the love, and the intention behind every gift. Rose had fought to preserve these treasures for someone who would cherish them properly. Now it was Elena's turn to fight for Rose's wishes, no matter the cost. The real battle was just beginning, but Elena was no longer fighting alone. She had Rose's love, Rose's meticulous planning, and the truth on her side. It was time to find out if that would be enough. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of November weather that made Portland feel perpetually on the edge of winter. Elena sat in Attorney Sarah Chen's office downtown, her carefully organized evidence spread across the conference table like battle plans. Harold Hartwell sat beside her, his professional demeanor lending credibility to her case, while across the table, Marcus and Victoria flanked their own lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit who looked like she ate probate disputes for breakfast. The meeting had been arranged as a final attempt at mediation before formal court proceedings began. Elena had spent her weekend savings on a consultation with Sarah Chen, a probate attorney who specialized in family inheritance disputes. Chen had reviewed Elena's documentation with growing amazement, calling Rose's preparation the most thorough inheritance planning I've seen outside of formal legal documents. "Let's begin," said the mediator, a retired judge named William Torres, who had agreed to oversee the discussion. "I understand we have a dispute over jewelry inheritance that the parties hope to resolve without formal litigation." Victoria's attorney, Ms. Patricia Knowles, spoke first with practiced authority. "Your Honor, my clients are concerned about a significant jewelry collection that was distributed outside the normal probate process. The deceased, Rose Martinez, appears to have made informal promises about valuable items without proper legal documentation or family consultation. Given Mrs. Martinez's advanced age and dependence on one family member for daily care, we question whether these decisions were made with full mental capacity and without undue influence." Elena felt her cheeks burn at the accusation, but Attorney Chen had prepared her for this approach. The undue influence angle was common in inheritance disputes, especially when elderly people made gifts to their caregivers. "Your Honor," Chen responded calmly, "we have extensive documentation proving Mrs. Martinez's clear mental capacity and consistent intentions over a 15-year period. Far from informal promises, Mrs. Martinez created detailed records, obtained professional appraisals, and documented her heritage preservation goals with remarkable thoroughness." Elena watched the mediator's expression as both attorneys presented their opening arguments. Judge Torres had seen countless family disputes over money and possessions, but something in his weathered face suggested this case was different from the usual inheritance squabbles. "Let's examine the evidence," Torres said finally. "Ms. Knowles, please present your client's concerns." Victoria stood, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her demeanor confident. "Your Honor, our grandmother was 92 years old when she died. In her final years, she became increasingly dependent on our cousin Elena for basic daily activities. Elena moved into the house, managed grandmother's finances, controlled her social interactions, and essentially became her only connection to the outside world. Elena wanted to object that she had never controlled Rose's finances or social interactions, but Chen placed a restraining hand on her arm. This isolation created an environment where grandmother's decision-making could be influenced by someone with a vested interest in inheriting valuable property, Victoria continued. The jewelry collection in question is worth approximately $50,000, a significant sum that wasn't mentioned in grandmother's formal will, because we believe she didn't understand its current market value. Marcus stood next, his PR training evident in his polished presentation. "We're not suggesting Elena deliberately manipulated our grandmother, but when elderly people become dependent on one caregiver, they sometimes make impulsive gifts out of gratitude or fear of abandonment. The fact that grandmother didn't discuss these valuable bequests with other family members suggests she may not have fully understood the financial implications of her decisions." Judge Torres nodded thoughtfully. "These are serious concerns. Ms. Chen, how does your client respond to allegations of undue influence and questions about Mrs. Martinez's mental capacity?" Elena felt her heart pounding as Chen stood, but her attorney's voice was steady and confident. Your Honor, Mrs. Rose. Martinez was not a confused elderly woman making impulsive decisions. She was a sharp, organized individual who spent 15 years carefully planning the preservation of family heritage. With the court's permission, I'd like Mr. Harold Hartwell to speak to Mrs. Martinez's mental state and planning process. Harold. Hartwell rose slowly, his dignified bearing commanding attention. Your Honor, I knew Rose Martinez for over 20 years as a customer at my family's jewelry store. 6 months before her death, she contacted me specifically to document her jewelry collection and verify her inheritance plans. She was completely lucid, discussing complex family dynamics and expressing concerns about post-death conflicts with remarkable clarity. He opened his folder and placed professional photographs on the table. Mrs. Martinez paid me to photograph and appraise every piece in her collection. She understood exactly what she owned, its current market value, and the potential family conflicts her decisions might create. She told me explicitly that she was preserving family heritage for someone who would value stories over money. Elena watched her cousins' faces as Harold continued his testimony. Victoria's confident expression was wavering, while Marcus looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mrs. Martinez also discussed the family dynamics that concerned her. Harold continued. She told me about grandchildren who were successful but distant, who visited rarely and showed little interest in family history. She contrasted this with Elena, who had lived with her, cared for her, and demonstrated genuine appreciation for the stories and significance behind each piece. Judge Torres leaned forward with interest. Mr. Hartwell, in your professional opinion, did Mrs. Martinez understand the financial value of what she was giving away? Completely, Harold replied firmly. She knew the collection was worth approximately $50,000. She said, and I quote, "Money comes and goes, but family stories die if no one cares enough to preserve them." She was making a deliberate choice to preserve heritage over maximizing financial inheritance. Victoria's attorney tried to recover. Groundwegru. Mr. Hartwell, regardless of Mrs. Martinez's intentions, doesn't a $50,000 inheritance warrant family discussion? Doesn't excluding other relatives from such valuable bequests suggest impaired judgment? Harold smiled slightly. Ms. Knowles, Mrs. Martinez told me she had tried discussing family heritage with her other grandchildren over the years. She said they showed polite disinterest at best, sometimes openly dismissing the stories as old lady nostalgia. She wasn't excluding them from discussion. They had excluded themselves through years of indifference. Elena felt tears threatening, as she remembered countless family gatherings where Marcus and Victoria had barely tolerated Rose's stories about the old days, checking their phones and changing the subject as quickly as possible. Mrs. Martinez was preserving family heritage the only way she could, Harold continued, by ensuring it went to someone who would treasure it properly. That's not impaired judgment. That's wisdom. Chen stood again. Your Honor, we have additional evidence of Mrs. Martinez's clear thinking and consistent planning. She placed Rose's journals on the table, opened to pages detailing the history of various jewelry pieces. These journals span several years and show systematic documentation of family heritage. Mrs. Martinez wasn't making impulsive decisions. She was executing a long-term preservation plan. Elena watched the mediator read excerpts from Rose's journals, his expression growing more interested with each page. The detailed family histories, the careful notes about which pieces suited Elena's personality and coloring, the references to future milestones when specific items might be worn, all painted a picture of thoughtful, loving planning rather than confused elderly gifting. There's more, Chen continued, placing Rose's final letter on the table. Mrs. Martinez wrote this letter 3 months before her death, specifically addressing potential family conflicts and explaining her reasoning. Your Honor, this is not the writing of someone with impaired mental capacity. Judge Torres read Rose's letter carefully, his weathered face softening as he absorbed her words about love, legacy, and the difference between family members who saw heritage versus those who saw assets. Victoria's attorney made one final attempt. Your Honor, even accepting Mrs. Martinez's mental capacity, the issue remains one of fairness. Family heirlooms should benefit all family members, not just the one who happened to live with the deceased. We're asking for equitable distribution, not elimination of Elena's inheritance. Elena finally found her voice. Your Honor, may I speak? Torres nodded, and Elena stood on shaking legs. I understand my cousin's feelings about fairness, but this isn't about who deserved what or who lived where. This is about honoring what my grandmother specifically wanted. She gestured to the jewelry photographs spread across the table. Every piece has a story that grandmother told me dozens of times. She wasn't just giving me valuable objects. She was preserving family memories that would die without someone to carry them forward. Elena's voice grew stronger as she continued. Marcus and Victoria are successful, accomplished people who built wonderful lives without needing these pieces. Grandmother knew that. She also knew they saw dollar signs where she saw history. She chose to preserve heritage with someone who would value it the way she did. She looked directly at her cousins. You're asking me to break up a collection that grandmother spent 15 years carefully building and documenting. You want to scatter pieces that have been together for generations, that tell the story of our family's journey from Mexico to America. That's not fair distribution. That's destruction of exactly what grandmother was trying to preserve. The room fell silent as Elena sat down. She could see the mediator processing everything he'd heard, weighing the legal evidence against the emotional testimony. Judge Torres spoke finally. This is an unusual case. We have extensive documentation of the deceased's mental capacity and consistent intentions over many years. We have professional testimony about her understanding of financial implications. And we have her own written explanations of her reasoning and concerns. He looked at Marcus and Victoria. While I understand your feelings about fairness, the evidence clearly shows your grandmother made informed, thoughtful decisions about heritage preservation. These weren't impulsive gifts or confused elderly generosity. They were deliberate. Choices made by someone who understood all the implications. Victoria's face flushed red. So Elena gets $50,000 in jewelry while we get nothing additional? You inherit the house, your grandmother's savings, and her other possessions, Torres pointed out. The jewelry represents her specific wishes for heritage preservation, thoroughly documented and legally sound. Marcus leaned forward desperately. What if Elena can't properly care for such valuable pieces? What if they're lost or damaged? Shouldn't family heirlooms be preserved in multiple locations for safety? Elena felt a flash of anger. I've cared for those pieces for 16 years while living with grandmother. I've never lost or damaged anything. And unlike some people, I actually know the stories that make them meaningful. Chen placed a restraining hand on Elena's arm again, but Torres nodded approvingly. Ms. Martinez raises a valid point. The person most likely to properly preserve these items is the one who has been doing so for years and who understands their significance beyond monetary value. The mediation continued for another hour, with Victoria's attorney raising increasingly desperate objections and Chen methodically dismantling each argument with Rose's comprehensive documentation. Finally, Torres called for a recess to review all the evidence privately. When he returned, his decision was clear. Based on the extensive evidence presented, I find that Rose Martinez was mentally competent when making her jewelry bequests, that her decisions were informed and deliberate, and that there is no evidence of undue influence. The jewelry collection should remain with Elena Martinez as Mrs. Martinez clearly intended. Victoria stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking. Completely. This is ridiculous. Elena manipulated a lonely old woman, and now she's being rewarded with a fortune. Ms. Patterson, Torres warned, you're out of line. But Victoria wasn't finished. She isolated grandmother from the rest of the family, made herself indispensable, and convinced her to give away valuable heirlooms that should benefit everyone. It's elder abuse disguised as devotion. Elena felt something snap inside her. She stood, facing her cousin directly. Elder abuse? Victoria, I spent 16 years loving that woman unconditionally. I held her hand through cancer treatments, celebrated every birthday and holiday with her, listened to her stories even when I'd heard them 100 times. I never asked for anything in return except her love. Elena's voice rose with emotion. You want to know about elder abuse? Elder abuse is visiting twice a year and spending those visits on your phone. Elder abuse is dismissing her stories as senile rambling. Elder abuse is calling a woman who raised 3 generations needy because she wanted family connection in her final years. Tears were flowing freely now, but Elena didn't care. Grandmother gave me those pieces because she knew I would treasure them the way she did. Not because they're worth money, but because they're worth remembering. If you can't understand the difference, then you've proved exactly why she made the right choice. The room was silent, except for Elena's quiet sobbing. Even Victoria looked, shaken by the raw emotion in Elena's words. Judge Torres spoke gently. Ms. Martinez, your grandmother's documentation makes it clear that her decisions were based on love, not manipulation. She chose preservation over profit, heritage over mere inheritance. The jewelry collection remains yours, with the court's full support. After the mediation ended and the lawyers gathered their papers, Elena found herself alone with Marcus and Victoria in the hallway outside the conference room. The siblings looked defeated and resentful, their expensive clothes and professional demeanor unable to hide their disappointment. I hope you're satisfied, Victoria said bitterly. You've destroyed what was left of our family over some old jewelry. Elena looked at her cousins, really looked at them, perhaps for the last time. I didn't destroy our family, Victoria. Our family was destroyed years ago by indifference and neglect. Grandmother just documented the truth of it. Marcus shook his head. This isn't over, Elena. We still have to settle the house and the rest of the estate. Don't expect any favors or family discounts. I never expected anything from either of you except basic decency, Elena replied. Even that was apparently too much to ask. As her cousins walked away, Elena felt a mixture of victory and profound sadness. She had won the battle for Rose's jewelry, preserved the heritage collection that meant so much to both of them. But the cost had been the final destruction of any remaining family bonds. That evening, Elena sat in Rose's empty living room for the last time, the jewelry box open beside her on the sofa. Tomorrow, the house would belong to someone else, and she would return to San Francisco with her inheritance and her memories. She picked up the silver bracelet with tiny bells, the piece that had belonged to her great-grandmother. As she fastened it around her wrist, the bells chimed softly, a sound that connected her to generations of women she would never meet, but whose strength and love lived on in these preserved treasures. Elena thought about Rose's letter, about heritage versus inheritance, about the difference between value and worth. Her grandmother had been right. Some treasures couldn't be measured in dollars. They could only be measured in love, in stories, in the determination to preserve what mattered most for future generations. As rain began to fall outside Rose's windows one last time, Elena carefully closed the jewelry box and prepared to carry her grandmother's legacy forward. The pieces were safe, the stories preserved, and Rose's final wish fulfilled. The truth had prevailed, just as love always does when it's strong enough to fight for what matters most.